Welcome back to the Known Experience. We are here with Rob Murray. Rob was our first guest on this podcast, and we're excited to have you back. It's good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks, Sean.
It's great to have you back, man. It's been a year and a half. A lot has happened that we'll touch on, but it's pretty cool to have you kicking off the year for us.
The first time you were on here, we talked about the heart and soul of leadership, and it was such a great and I think refreshing perspective on leadership to a lot of the stuff out there that's very systematic and dry. And you have a new book that you've been working on. It's not coming out for a few months. I feel like a more holistic heart, soul, mind, and strength, the 4 quadrants of leadership. And you gave us an advanced copy. We're grateful for that. But at the beginning, you share a story in there that just grabbed my attention right away. It's part of your leadership journey and your journey into this understanding the complexity of all of us. Would you mind sharing that with us?
For sure, John. Yeah. I opened up the book with the story, and I had shared it briefly here and there before, but it's so relevant for so many of you, I think, listening to. I wonder if you can relate, maybe not specifically to what I'm about to share, but I show up to work. It's another day at the office. I love what I do. My partner, Jack, and I, we're running one of our leadership cohorts. And that one just so happened to be a group of guys, and I was hosting it at my house. Everything was awesome. And next thing you know, everyone leaves and my whole world changes. My wife's away in California. She's away on vacation, and I go nuts. Something happens. She calls, I pick up the phone, and she's, whoa, something's wrong. I'm like asking questions like, where am I? Where are the kids? And I'm like meant to be looking after them. She's freaked out. I have no memory of this. My brain is fritzing out. I'm freaking her out. She's trying to figure out how to call 911 and call friends and get people over there. And I'm fumbling through my house, just dazed and confused. The next thing you know, I'm being wheeled out. I looked at my Ring doorbell and could see the ambulance wheeling me out. And my friend Daniel had got to the house first and just saw me sitting there, and I was dazed. I was confused. I was repeating myself the same 3 minutes over and over. Where am I? How did I get here? Where is Natalie? I would cry in the same place. He'd say she's in California, and I'd say, why? And then I would tear up. Then I'd click on to the next thing. My brain had been damaged, and I was going into like overdrive, and I was stuck in this groundhog experience. They're all freaking out. I'm obviously at this point have no clue. In 3 minutes from now, I'm going to forget and start all over again. Get whisked out, get taken to the hospital. Really brutal, really hard moment for me to talk about. My kids were getting off the bus. My little girls were getting off the bus that day from school. Just fire trucks and ambulances, and they're just sweet little girls. They just don't know what to do. And we had enough friends that had arrived, and they just saw their daddy get taken away and their mom's away. And so it's just really traumatic for them. I get to the hospital, and through a series of hilarious events and stories, there's all these guys show up, and they're around my bed. And I've got a friend, Mike D. He said it was funny because apparently I was repeating myself so often that when I started my new loop, he would answer all the questions I was about to ask. He's like, you had a stroke. You went to the hospital. Natalie's in California. He said I would sit there confused and then kick back in and start all over again. So pretty freaky, right? Through a series of events, I end up going through all these tests, and they say I've got a confusional migraine until Vanderbilt Hospital gets on the line, and they're like, your patient is having strokes. Get him over here. So there I am, and they zip me down to Vanderbilt, and sure enough, I'd had 3 strokes. What had happened was I'd injured my neck. I've now worked it out that I'd got whiplash going down to Florida on vacation. I was just hanging out with the bike rack on the freeway and kinked my neck. And you won't believe that an injury like that can cause a wound, which can cause a blood clot, which can get into your blood system in the wrong way. Here I was unknowingly and unwillingly just sending blood clots to my brain through a series of unfortunate events. And they actually worked out I had 5 strokes. The one put me in the hospital, the 4th one, and then the 5th one I had in front of the doctors. Man, 39 years old, just lost my memory, lost some of my eyesight for a little bit, lost so many things, my ability to regulate my emotions. I mean, you name it, it was terrifying. One day, just top of the world doing a leadership cohort, and the next day confronted with my mortality. and getting a taste of being knocked down to my lowest common denominator. I went from being, I got it handled to someone take care of me. That started a couple years of recovery, confusion, being lost, trying to figure out how to salvage what I could and recover from what had happened. Anytime you're in a crisis, you never know what's going to come of it. And so I always say there were people around my bed that day in the hospital. There were people who got me to the hospital. There were people who helped me recover. There were people who came months later. There were all these different types of people around my life that played different roles. So I tell the story in the new book, especially to tie into the types of people we have around us, who they are, how they serve us in a crisis. And the last thing I'll say about that to bring you into this walk with the people in your life is I always say, I had a stroke, but what's your stroke? We all have a stroke, something. And if it's not now, you're going to have some version of that. It could be a divorce. It could be an affair that led to a divorce. It could be a bankruptcy. It could be a business you started and it failed. It could be a sickness that you got diagnosed with. It could be a friend that you lost. It could be a community that burned you, a church that ran tracks over you. Who knows? You name it. But there are certain things in all of our lives that we've already experienced, whether we deserved it or not, that came out of the blue and wrecked our lives. And that's part of the human experience. And that's what I experienced. It doesn't make sense. So sometimes life throws you a curveball and it's going to happen. And so maybe pause for a second as we start this podcast to go, what is my stroke like symbolically? What's that thing that I am going through, have gone through, or may go through? And then the second question is, who are the people that are in my life? Do you have a community? Keep this in mind. It's hard to find a community when you're in hospital. How do you cultivate a community of people that you understand, that you can have a sense of belonging with, not in case crisis comes, but for when crisis comes, and not just for crisis, but also for living a full life, living alive in the moment. And you've got to do that work starting now. And so that's a little bit of the story.
It's interesting you add that last part because when Sean and I first started this podcast, actually our first episode, we talked about friendship and about there's this whole rubric for casual friends, close friends, like how much time you need to spend with people in order for them to grow in your depth of friendship. And one thing we said is you can't cram. You can cram for tests. You can do your taxes last minute. There's a lot of things that you can cram into an amount of time, but friendship, trust, love, and vulnerability, you can't cram for. And Sean, I would say everything you went through with moving to the East Coast and COVID happening and all of that was a stroke in your life, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think whenever you find yourself alone, right, as Rob said, it really forces you into a much deeper exploration rather than leaning into some of the normal, safe, comfortable places we often do in our daily life. And that's really why he ended up on the podcast initially. After that, moving into this new season of my life, it became very busy very quickly. And I think I was 3 months in and I reached out to Rob because I was like, I'm a little lost right now in how I can lead all these people in a way that I've never led people before. And I can quickly see myself being lost in trying to care for others. And that started a journey about 13 months ago with what Rob has put together. He created a framework for me that started with me first. I was looking for him to solve the leadership so I could lead others better. And he was like, yeah, I can do that. How about you come out and see me? We'll do an intensive for 3 days. But it really turned out to be like, hey, you need to figure out you, care for you, understand you before you can lead well. My initial response was, I know myself pretty well. And he's, well, we'll find out about that. And it's been, I think Rob's kicked my ass in the best sort of way multiple times the past 13 months. But he's given definition and why he's here again today with these 4 quadrants. When you're going as a leader, as a father, you're so committed to the mission and the goal that all this stuff can be more about checking boxes. To your point, John, you're just looking for the hack that really gets you to a place quicker so you can work more efficiently and care for yourself quickly. And so I think that's why I'm excited to have him here. And this next book he's releasing, and hopefully it helps other people as much as it's helped me the past 13 months.
Let's just jump into that, Rob. Tell us about the 4 quadrants and what brought you there, and give us an overview of them.
Yeah, in our first book, The Human Operating System, my field is transformational leadership, how human beings change, grow, develop. We got these 5 principles. One of the parts of that principle, really the foundations, we all sell apps, but the operating system is the undermining or bottom that holds up everything. Part of the human operating system is this idea that we all have a heart, soul, mind, and body or strength. And we've used those 4 models, those 4 quadrants. And over the years, Jack and I have taken that into the mainstream space of business and commerce and schools and hospitals. But one of the principles we've then taken out, it's the 3rd principle, and it's this idea that you start in those quadrants somewhere as a human being and you flow through them in a specific order. I wonder if it was the original personality assessment. And the way we look at it is more of an essence. We're trying to find out the essence of who we are. Like, there's always nature and nurture. We are who we are because of who we became based on our circumstances, or maybe this is who we should have been, but we relinquished that. And so with all of these things, it's a question. We're not conclusive, but it's like, who are you? Every human being's asking, who am I? Like, where do I belong? How do I express myself in this world? And we're all asking those questions. They're fundamental questions. Any book on purpose or something like that sells like hotcakes, where people are trying to figure out what they're meant to be doing in this world, and we want to know it over and over. And so I'm not sure about that, but what I am very drawn towards is maps. And I think it was because I was so confused my whole life growing up. I'm from South Africa. I've come to America. You've mocked me for my accent, so I've softened it. But language is a huge barrier. If you go to a country where they don't speak English, you feel a little lost. I have felt lost all throughout my life. This idea of having a map for understanding human beings, to not only be the best version of who I could be, but to say, God, who have you made me to be? How do I steward that? And how do I offer that to the world? And then for others to say, how do I understand the people around me so that I'm not always so confused with how they're coming at me, or how do we work together? So we took those quadrants to be able to help people in businesses and churches, nonprofits, families identify which quadrant do you start in: heart, soul, mind, and strength. Are you a heart starter, a mind starter, a strength starter, or a soul starter? I know there's a lot of other personality assessments or things like that, and they're amazing if you get in and you really understand them. But it's amazing for me to walk into your office and go, oh, this guy's a heart starter or they're a mind starter. I can immediately grasp a sense of how you see the world. And so we are working on helping identify where people start and then how they flow through the quadrants. Like, you may be a heart starter, but what's your next move? Which is cool, because you go from 2 people standing in heart and we're like, oh, we love the inner world and how I feel is amazing. But then one guy goes up to strength and the other one goes over to soul as their next move, which nuances who they are as human beings. And then they move a 3rd time, and then they move a 4th time. And once you figure out your flow, you'll realize that 4th quadrant's got stories to it, but it nuances who you are. It becomes simple for you not just to read someone's mail, but to feel less crazy and understand their value system, whether you like it or not. It's like you just feel less offended by them. So then you'll find out if someone maybe read too many Pat Lencioni books, or they are a heart starter but lead with the mind, which is strategic leadership.
What do you do if they've read too many John Maxwell books, and is that fixable?
Let's say they have. Which quadrant's going to come and rise to the surface with those books?
Well, I need you to explain the quadrants to me a little better first.
All right. Here's where this ties in, and I'll share that with you in a second. And then I'll just say, I'll bring the story in from the beginning. When I had my stroke, there were people in the room, and I have a photo of about 7 or 8 people in the room. I can see them and I know them, and they all start somewhere differently on the quadrants, which means even in my crisis, they were all there, but they all offered a unique contribution. And then as I left the hospital, maybe some other friends moved in and some moved out. And then as I went for like 5 months, 12 months, some friends moved in, some different friends moved out. They played different roles. But because I understand where they start, how they flow, to the best of my knowledge, and allowed me to see them for who they were and what they weren't. I'm going to test you guys, and you don't have to get this right, but let's just see if it's that intuitive. And I'll just nudge you left or right. And we're going to go through the quadrants. If I'm going to say someone starts in the heart, you got heart, soul, mind, and strength. What do you think someone who starts in the heart would be? What's some of their values?
Authenticity.
Oh my gosh, they're authentic.
They talk a lot about self-care if they're an employee of yours.
They want to take care of themselves. They're
They've got to
vulnerable.
be, they got to be passionate about something.
Passionate, yeah, which is being driven by what? Feelings,
Yeah.
wants, needs, desires. So they're driven by feelings, wants, needs, desires, passion. They're authentic. When they walk into the room or a project, what are they most concerned about? Probably.
How is this going to feel for everyone else?
So they're thinking about other people. They're orientated around culture. Their baseline is who's with me. One of the questions a heart starter will be is who's in. So if I said, hey, do you want to go on a ski trip? They're like, who's in? They don't even like skiing, but they'll go because they know that you're going and they like you. So they're motivated often by connection. Connection is the word. Okay. So let's go up to strength. So for us, top right corner, we're coming down from the bottom. Strength, when I think like you walk in and someone's a strength starter, what's that kind of person's value system look like?
Well, I think strength is just the guy that if there's a project, he's the one that talks first, outlines how you're going to achieve it, right? Is the self-professed leader of the group. We'll get it done no matter what, right? He's like that guy.
Yeah, exactly. So this person who starts in strength is probably listening to your podcast right now going, all right, what do they want me to do with this information? And when are they going to get to the actionables? Okay, we're currently in the mind quadrant. We're talking about the framework. So mind people are all about structure and information and the data and organizing it. It's bringing order and logic. The strength person is like, yeah, that's really helpful. What do you want me to do with that? Mm-hmm. So they're very tangible, very tactile, like practical. I may map out as a mind person, I may map out the strategic plan, but the strength person is performance leadership. They want to actually win and execute. And so they're motivated by that. The mind person is still sitting there thinking on what is the most strategic process improvement way to win. How do I better what we just did? How do I improve performance? And then down in the soul quadrant, the soul starter is down in the qualitative with the heart. The soul person is going to be someone who is driven by meaning. They're driven by the why. That's the why quadrant. If I say, let's go to that ski trip, they're not as motivated by who's going, but the soul person sits there and goes, why would I go on that ski trip? What are the conversations we're going to have? And what would those conversations mean? What is the larger why behind the what or the who or the how? And so they're like the Gandalf on the side of the hill where it's like they've created enough space for contemplation and consideration. They operate at that level. They may be more metaphor driven. They could be more creative. And so they're motivated by that. And so all of a sudden you've got these different types of people in the room, and that starts to make for a very interesting landscape. If you understand it, you're not as confused when you're with one of those people. Because I don't know about you, I sometimes think, what's wrong with them? Why don't they get it? Now I think, man, I wonder how they see the world, because it's not the way that I see it. And if I can grasp how they see it and how they're showing up to their life, there may be a part of life that they could reveal to me that I can't access so easily as they do. Because I may be feeling it like, oh my gosh, we're all going to go and do this together. I'm motivated by the people in the room. And then the soul guy goes, well, why are we going to do this? And then I'm frustrated because I'm like, who cares? And they're like, me. And then I'm like, oh, okay. If I have a sense of human dignity that I am not the city that everyone has to build their life around, we're better together, which is a collaborative stance of the heart quadrant anyway, I all of a sudden realize that they will deepen my contemplation around the trip, which may slow me down, make me more thoughtful, make me more considerate, and off we go. But let me ask you guys, with that in mind, have some fun with me for a second. If you're down in the heart quadrant, like you see a person in the heart quadrant, what do we say about heart people behind their back? It's in a project, You're trying to get stuff done. Maybe you're like a strength guy, or you're working your strategic plan as a mind starter. But sometimes we look at the heart people and what do we say? Have some fun with me. What are some of the things they already know it, by the way?
Sean, what do you say about me behind my back? Go ahead.
Yeah, what do you say about him, Sean?
Well, of the heart people, I think it'd be like they need to grow some balls.
There you
Like,
go. There you
They
go.
they can't have hard conversations, right? Like
Oh, they can't have heart. They're gonna get their feelings hurt. They're too soft.
they're
too
afraid of
insecure.
confrontation, right?
Just do your job. Just get stuff done. Stop navel gazing and figuring out how you feel about it. You got to do your job.
I don't really care how you feel. Just do what you're told.
Yeah.
So the heart gets that's the shadow side of that. They could be like enmeshed with everything, and everything's such a big deal. And you're like, oh gosh. Sometimes you just avoid them, or you're like, seriously, I can't do it. But then let's go to those strength starters in our lives. All right, let's talk some shadows. The strength starter comes through the room, they come through the project, they come through your home, and what are we saying about them? We're going, dear Lord.
Yeah.
Just
You're
an intimidating
fine,
energy, right? Like they're a bulldozer. It can be an energy suck for a lot of people because there's just a lot of fear around them.
Yeah. Could you just have a little bit of empathy for the people around you and not just plow through everything? I just worked with some teams like yesterday, so this is fresh on my mind. And would you say they also have a hard time, like when you're working through the creative part of a planning process, looking at possibilities, it seems like it's uncomfortable for them. It's even frustrating for them.
Yeah. Oh, it's a waste of time. Because what you just said is the creative possibilities. That is cultivating a sense of soul. That's a soul discussion in whatever context it is. And you're bringing a contemplative, creative conversation to an action-orientated person. They're like, what? Who cares? Or, hey, let's do this for 5 minutes, but then let's spend another 10 minutes to map out the 3 things. And then we should probably spend the rest of the meeting just doing it.
Yeah. Can we just stop with the kumbaya and get something done?
Correct. So they're insensitive. They're abrasive. Sometimes you feel like you're just a transaction. And so they care more about the snowboarding. I'm not going snowboarding anytime yet. It's just maybe me saying, Sean, we should go snowboarding. But they care more about the action and the snowboarding activity. So you're on the trip thinking we're going to have a great time as friends. And you are having a shared experience, but they're spending every waking hour living the activity. They're driven by that, which is cool because it gets you away from the fire and you actually got out, put your boots on and went snowboarding more than you would have. So they draw you into activity and you draw them into connection. But in a project, sometimes we're like, man, that's a lot of person. And so we distance ourselves. The mind starters, the shadow of the mind starter is what? Oh my gosh, you just feel like you're part of the science experiment because they're way up and they're theorizing you, or they're just theorizing everything. And so they're not even like in the action. They are creating the plans, but they're not actually executing on the plans, like not while they're there initially. So they're bringing up the most amazing strategic planning. And I don't know if you've ever run a strategic planning day with someone who really likes to do that. They're unbelievably talented and they're so excited. But then there's so many quotes and statistics and there's so much teaching and education that your eyes are glazing over and you're like, dear Lord, this is exhausting. It's too many details.
Right.
Would you say they get in the weeds too much on like analysis paralysis? Would that be
Correct.
a mind starter?
That's exactly it. They're just analyzing. So the mind starter is overlooking the fact that there's human beings, that actually there's actions that have to be taken. And sometimes planning and process, when done in a vacuum, means that they lack the soul quadrant, which is actually context as to how their strategic plan fits the greater, larger vision. So it's a great plan, but it doesn't fit the larger vision of where you're headed. Then we go down into the soul, and what's some of the shadows of a soul person? It's what are they talking about? Did they stumble into some of that Colorado mushroom stuff? What is happening here? It's too ethereal. And so you're like, how do I reel in the kite? Or, wow, that's very philosophical. That's super interesting. That's just a creative idea. And what are the strength starters saying? Never going to happen. Amazing concepts, will never execute on it.
Right.
What are the mind people saying? Great idea, never going to create a plan around it.
They often fall in love with the vision of something.
Fall in love with the vision. And so it's, oh, you have another amazing creative idea? All right, let's hear about it. And so every one of those kinds of people have the best contribution, and then they have this kind of shadow. That's interesting. for me to walk into a room and know the best and worst of who someone is and not think it's that personal.
Hmm.
It's my friend who starts in the strength quadrant. Oh my gosh, they're going to motivate me to get stuff done. When I had my stroke, I had a friend who was like, "You're going to get through this. You got this." That strength guy. It's like energy. But I also realized he was pretty uncomfortable sitting at my bedside for too long, because it's got this means you need to get out of your bed and get it done. So I was getting motivated to get out of my bed, but there was limitations to that energy, which meant I realized I'm going to have to get a lot more better to get a lot more further, to be a lot more closer to this person. So there was limitations to that. Then I got the heart person going, "Hey, I'll stay at your bed forever. And if I lay around in my hospital bed forever, that's not going to help me either." So I got the gift of connection. And then another friend shows up and believes in me. And then another friend shows up in the mind and says, "Man, what's the plan here for the next 6 months?" They're mapping out a help schedule, a food schedule, like they're mapping out what I need to recover. And then the person in the soul is going, "Man, once I'm coming conscious and once I'm getting a little bit of my feet underneath me," they're going, "Man, Rob, what do you think the stroke means for the context of your life?" Like they're asking open-ended questions. They're not asking, "How do you feel, heart?" Or "What do you need to do, strength?" Or "What's the plan, mind?" They're like, "What does this mean for the Murray family? What does this mean for your career? What do you see? What are you sensing?" Very contemplative, which is very cathartic. And so those friendships, they start to work in a way that's very integrative and complementary to what I needed in those moments. And of
So,
course, those people have limitations.
yeah. Well, so I have a question. I think where my confusion came in my journey was I always identified as a soul person, right? And then it felt that way until I became older in life. And I was like, oh, being a soul driven person isn't putting food on the table. It's actually not making my vision come to life. So I've shifted, and as Rob knows, he identified or helped me identify myself. I actually start in strength now, which is the exact opposite of what I thought I was. When I was youthful and ideal and probably more pure, I was soul. And now I'm a
Yeah.
hard strength guy who just wants to get shit done. And
Yeah.
the soul is still an element, but I weigh the value. And I think the question is, Rob, do you find that people transition? Do they start as one?
Yeah.
And for utility or just season of life or pain they experience personally, do they shift because the cost of being whatever they are naturally is too great? So they have to shift, right? So there's this confusion. This is who I am, but this actually isn't how I can operate, because who I am doesn't serve me in life. And that feels good when I'm sitting on the beach, but in real life, I actually have to operate this way. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, Sean. And I said it earlier, but the nature versus nurture versus adapting. And that's the whole point of quadrant flow. It's not for us to pin you anytime you take a test. If it's not the beginning of a conversation, then it's probably not a great test. There's only so much we can do. And whatever you test is the way you experience yourself. That's why we're doing a 360, because I also want you to be able to say, "Well, I experience myself this way." And then for others to go, "Oh, we experience you collectively this way." It doesn't mean anyone's right. It just means you've got some data points to go, "Wow, that's interesting." And then to ask the questions you asked, which is this who I really am, or is this who I became to survive my life or adapt my life or capitalize on my life? What I mean is, I believe data points give us the gift of just information, and then you get to choose to do with that information what you want. And it's a lot easier to do anything in life when you at least are having awareness. So you're spot on that we sometimes adapt to a different quadrant, because often I'll say to somebody when they stand in their first quadrant, I'll say, "Is this who you are, or is this who you became?" And then that creates an amazing conversation about, "Well, no, I'm probably not who I am." And then I'll often ask a team while I have them. I was just doing it this week with the team, and I let people self-select which quadrant they want to stand in. And then I'll say, if you could move anyone out of their quadrant because you don't experience them that way, which quadrant would you move them to? And someone may say, "Wow, Sean, I don't experience you as a strength starter. I would have put you in a soul starting quadrant." And that may be because they experience you through that lens because of the nature of your relationship. So this week, someone said, "Oh, I would have moved you into the mind quadrant And then you find out their relationship at work is tied to data analytics. So this person only experiences them through the lens of work, which has created an impression of how they would view them. But the person actually does really start in heart, but they don't get to bring that part of who they are in that context. Again, I know we could say, wow, it's getting so confusing, but let's be honest, it's a lot less confusing than a lot of other models. Heart, soul, mind, and strength. You flow through all four. We learn about them. We get curious, and we'll start to have some fascinating conversations.
I've had about half an hour of this, and I already am realizing so much how it can be helpful to me. I mean, just a real world within the last 24 hours. I did strategic planning time with 7 teams yesterday. I did a survey with them of the whole 3-day experience. And I have one person say, I found it very difficult, but I think it's been helpful. And I had another person say, this has been the most inspiring thing I've ever been a part of. I can't wait for the next one. I hear that inspiring part for about 30 seconds. And then the other one just wrecks me because I'm like, why was it difficult? What's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? And now I hear you talking, and I realize this one person was a heart and soul person. This other guy that was very difficult for strength leader, he just wants to plan and execute. And the amount of time that we spent in evaluating and exploring new ideas was painful for him.
Yeah.
And it's not about me. And I think, I guess my first takeaway is this can help me see people in a way that's not judgmental. It's more informational, and it helps me better understand how to serve them and work with them. My question is, how is it useful to me personally? Obviously, understanding what I work from, but how can it help me evolve in that and not just say, oh, I'm just a heart starter and that's all I'll ever be?
Good question. Firstly, real quick on your last comment, which you interpreted as a judgment, which it isn't. It's actually someone who's tactile driven, practical driven. And the answer to that comment is, good, you're welcome. I created an opportunity for you to stretch yourself into an area that you don't naturally thrive in. Then your next question is, how does this impact us personally? And also, how do I not use it as an excuse? I'll answer that one first and back into the other. In a lot of these assessments where we find out where we are, I'm just an Enneagram 8, or I'm just this on the Myers-Briggs, or this is just who I am. That's fine. That's one way to live your life, but it's very limiting. I think we're meant to have a heart, a soul, a mind, and a body, and the components of that, and you would want that. So the word is integration, which is not like a super exciting word, but we're called to be integrated. And so the goal of Quadrant Flow is to acknowledge you have a primary quadrant that you start in, a secondary quadrant that has a lot of energy, and then third slower, down to your fourth, which you either buried or you've hidden or abandoned, or you just neglect, or you don't even know what it means, so you just haven't cultivated it. So there's a flow there. But the goal is not 25% of every one of those. It's just to acknowledge you have a primary starting point. It's probably going to take up a lot of energy. But if you build a city there and then start to tell the world that the world exists only within the context of whatever quadrant you have built, you're going to be someone who has a whole bunch of people groupthink, and you're going to have a whole bunch of your people living in your city thinking the world should exist that way. That's a very boring world, and it's very colorless. So there's a texture we want. So the word is integration. How do we have all of those 4 quadrants? I am responsible to have all 4. I primarily start in this one and move to this one, but I am responsible to cultivate all 4. I don't mind outsourcing, by the way. And the idea of the quadrants eventually is that you realize how you flow. What does this have to do with me personally? Well, here's how it works together. Once you realize that we all move and flow, your personal world just becomes a whole lot more easier to understand. My kids, my wife, my business partnerships, my friendships. I said earlier, I feel like I've got a lot of heart to strength energy. Feels good, let's go. Who am I feeling good with these guys? These guys want me on the podcast. Do they like me? Do I feel connected to them? Let's go. I don't even know what they want from me. I don't know why we're doing it, but feels good, let's go. When I'm afraid or insecure or threatened, I will often run over to the mind quadrant first and grab some structure and information to calm my nervous system. So that's an interesting thing that happens there. My natural flow is heart to strength. but I have a little bit of a fork in the road when I'm insecure or afraid. So I know that about me when I start to overthink. It's like a quadrant where I've stayed safe in my life. But if I'm heart to strength, and then I look over at my marriage and my wife is soul to mind. So now I'm going, what is wrong with you? And she's looking at me going, what is wrong with you? But if we have a different perspective, instead of thinking what's wrong with you and acknowledging that you have access to quadrants that I get to 3 and 4, and she's going, wait, you have access to quadrants that I get to 3 and 4? Imagine if we collaborated and worked together, how we would see every situation, every circumstance, every part of our marriage if we saw it through the power of integration and the power of collaboration. And so I am ready, like, hey, babe, I'm feeling like we need to go on vacation. And I just booked us tickets to wherever. And she's like, wait, what? Where are we going? And I just was like, there's a sale on flights. And I just go book something. And she's like, wait, why are we going away? What's the purpose of this? Wait, what did you do? What are the details? And so what happens is now the gift in my personal life is she slows me down. Before I make that heart to strength action, I feel it. And then I slow down and I'm trying to borrow some of her easy energy, the stuff she gets to way quicker than me. And I'll go, hey, I'm about to book flights in an hour. They say, give me 3 hours and then let's talk. And in that talk, she may slow down and say, wait, why are we doing this trip? And she may get into the nuts and bolts. And then my actions 3 hours later may be a little bit more wiser, more intentional, more meaningful. And I won't have to cancel the flights, which I would have had to do anyway, because I booked them before I knew that there was a larger calendar at play. And she already had some thoughts for something else. And my brain wasn't there because I'm not in the mind quadrant. So personally, you start to see your children in these quadrants. You start to see your friends. I have 4 kids and I can experience, wow, one of my kids starts in mind. One of them starts in strength and one of them starts in heart. And so that's how they view the world. It doesn't mean I don't give my kid who starts in mind a heart. It means that I bring my heart to his mind. I bring my action and strength to his mind. And my son Noah, he is contemplative. He's probably a lot of mind and soul energy like my wife. And so I appreciate him. And he somewhat appreciates me. But a lot of passion and strength energy into the mind and soul energy is we come as a force. So that's a lot. But does that make sense?
Yeah. I think some of the beautiful integration of it, the framework has given me a little bit of grace for myself and understanding. So I think as a leader, it's helped me. I don't have to be everything to everyone. That's how I led before. I'll be all things to everyone, right? I can finish the task. I can do it with heart. I can have a vision that people really buy it. Like you try to be everything. And I'm like, okay, now I delegate much more and I don't have guilt around it. I'm like, oh, true leadership is finding strengths and delegating and helping guide through that for me. And it frees me up. I'm like, oh, I don't have the responsibility to be everything to everyone. Right?
Hold on, Sean. I'm going to stop you and make you say that again. Because people do that a lot, especially strength starters. True leadership is, you said firstly, I'm like, well, I don't know. It's up for debate.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
So conclusive. True leadership is, and then you fired off 3 things, and then I can't help but see them through the quadrants. So I don't know if you remember what you said, but it was like true leadership is delegating. I'm like, that comes from the strength and mindish kind of quadrants. What is true leadership for you, Sean?
Well, I thought true leadership was being all things to all people. And you'll just run yourself ragged because each one of those quadrants isn't your strength. So you can't be all things to all people. Yeah. Or you can for a very short amount of time and then you overheat and the shadow comes out.
Yep.
And so it's been very helpful for me in my leadership style, not the leadership style.
Look at you.
But also relationally and coming home, it really has allowed me to be like, oh, I love being in the soul space with my family. I'm actually not a strength guy. When I walk in the door, I switch quadrants, right? I'm not about directing my family. I find myself resting in the soul space with my family, right? I'm not a strength guy. And so that's where it's helped me is like, I'd always assumed you should be who you are at all times, everywhere. Yes and no, but being able to shift quadrants and being mindful of that and to know where the more restful space is has been really helpful for me.
The only way I would nuance that, Sean, just the way that I see it, is you said I switch quadrants or I'm not a strength guy at home. I would argue you are,
Right.
But
Right.
so the nuance, it's real nuanced. It's like we are all full all the time. So it's like a sense of, well, when I go home, I flow more out of this quadrant because I know you take care of your family and I know you work hard for them. And I know that you have a passion and determination. I know all that's happening underneath the surface, but you lead with a different expression of who you are based on the full. And so I like that. I start to flow out of that. And John, where do you start? Like when you think you said you feel like you're a heart starter.
As Sean said, true leadership is delegation. I would say true leadership is inspiring people. So heart and soul. But just in listening to you talk, I'm realizing when other people are working with me and we're trying to put on an event, my relationship with them can be more strength. Hey, I just need you guys to execute. And then I get in front of the people to speak and I'm all heart and soul. And I'm realizing I need to bring more of that into the people working with me so they don't feel like I'm just like the general, like commanding the troops, but that I'm also meeting them in that place as same place as I am the clients.
Where do you think you start, Sean? Like, how do you experience him?
I experience him in that way, but I think I see myself very much like that. If it's speaking to someone about something, I think a lot of them would perceive me as a heart guy, but I know how to speak that language. But my goal is coming from a strength side, right? I have an objective in what I'm sharing with people. So I can actually speak your language, but I'm still operating out of my strength. I'm just communicating in a way that touches the heart people. But at the core, I'm really still operating from my strength, if that makes sense.
Good. I want to touch on that and come back to a question on that. Sean just nailed something that happens because we learn all the quadrants. Often we can manipulate the other quadrants to get to what we really want. Like I'm a strength person. I have worked out that if I tell people I love and care about them, I get better performance out of them. I have found that if I give them the structure, I get better performance out of them. Or we start to read the room and in a way manipulate. So some people are really good at that. But that's a great point, Sean. Where is your primary motivation and how do the other quadrants fuel that? And how are you gold and shadow manipulating them for better or for worse? But how do you experience John? Which quadrant would you put him in as a starter, his primary energy?
I would say heart.
John, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think between heart and soul, I would be curious to evaluate deeper which one is more primary. But yeah, I mean, I think heart.
Yeah. So he's given away, even while I'm not sure between these two, which means probably you could have a heart to soul or a soul to heart flow. Now, when you understand that in our model, you will see how nuanced it is. You could have heart to soul energy, like inspiring is soul, but connecting to an idea to inspired brings something versus I am inspired and now I need to bring the connection. So it depends on the order. So that'll be interesting. Do you experience Sean as strength starter?
Well, to what he pointed to, I would say yes, for sure. If we're talking athletics, 1000%.
You win.
If we're going to evaluate Sean's social media posts, you'll have a total strength post about athletics. If you're not playing to win, what are you out there for?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't post that. I don't put, come on.
Don't make me bring receipts, buddy. But then if he's posting about his kids or his wife, or even when I went to visit you when you opened the restaurant, I see you as a restaurant manager with your team, strong. And then I see you out in the parking lot with a homeless guy that's there all the time that you want to connect with. You're not just trying to run him off because he's affecting your business. Like your heart and your soul are connected there. So yeah, I think strength, but I think you do, as probably we all do, come into different situations flowing out of a different part.
Yeah. And I want to make sure I share this before we close up. I'll just say this real quick. That fourth quadrant, I'll often have a team while they're standing up and doing our thing. I'll say, I want you to go stand in the fourth quadrant. And then I'll ask them questions about that. What is it about this quadrant? And it's unbelievable. Now, there has to be a fourth quadrant if you're measuring 1, 2, 3, 4 in an order, like by the nature of how you structure things, there's going to be a fourth. But that fourth part of who we are, it's often got a wound on it. It's either being neglected or you're ignorant of it. It's, well, I don't even know what the soul quadrant is. And that person may have grown up in a very pragmatic, practical family that's like, you know what? We get our work done. We do it real good. and we make sure we don't hurt people along the way because everyone's stronger together. And they're like, what's the soul quadrant? Well, then you come out of it, maybe a creative family, and the soul is very familiar, but you may have been the child of creative parents and you realize that their loftiness and their aspirations for these ideas and all that stuff ended in the result that you weren't provided for well. So you have a soul, but you don't want a soul because that's what put you in a place of really not being taken care of as a child. So you buried that part of you and said, you know what, I'll never be like my parents. I'll never have dreams and creativity and innovation. I'm not going to be an artist because you know what, that actually equals this. So you bury that because it's a wound. And then one day you're like me, my soul wasn't ever necessary. I come from South Africa. We're practical. We'll get it done. I'm a survivor. And you're telling me I need to have dreams? No, I got to survive, get it done, and show up and do good work. So I am in the process of rehabilitating and recovering my soul. It's actually a real thing that I'm doing right now. I'm learning to cultivate soul. I'm learning to be creative. I'm learning how to share metaphors and stories. I've never done that. And I'm recovering my soul, which is my fourth quadrant. I am learning how to attach meaning and purpose to those things. That's growth for me.
Yeah.
What's your fourth quadrant? Interesting.
It's actually tough. I don't have an obvious one. I feel like I do a good job of recognizing the why, the how, the what, but I think I discount because life has been what it is for me. I discount heart. Heart carries less weight in the decision-making process because, and Rob knows this, I discount my emotion because emotion gets in the way for me.
Yeah.
And so
Beautiful.
So I recognize it, but it carries the least amount
Yeah.
of weight at this stage of my life.
And so, John, you're up next, but that's called self-awareness. We all want it. Self-awareness is becoming aware of what is, not what we wish, not what we hope for, not what we're ashamed of. Oh, and then notice he qualified it though. He said indecision making. So he created a context for his quadrants. So you can do that, indecision making in this. And if you add up enough contextualized versions, you'll get to the aggregate. In the decision making process, it's easy for me to get to heart lost because I've learned through my life and through circumstances that is important, but not as important as this and this and this. That's brilliant. Thank you, Sean. And him knowing that about himself will allow him to go into a room and say that very thing. Yes, I would say that to my team. I want you guys to know I'm extremely considerate, very thorough, and very action driven. And there is a chance that when you are on my team, you may feel underengaged and not included. When those moments happen, would you be willing to let me know and engage me? Sometimes I can be scary, driven, intense, and I'm going to go get it, which I'm going to do. But I want to leave a caveat that I'm aware of it and I'm open. Then the person's, oh, okay. Versus, I wonder if he knows that he's just totally neglecting us and trumping us. So that gives your team the ability to approach you to normalize a shadow or a part of you that is not on full board, but it's open for business, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, John?
To bring it full circle, John Maxwell said, be sure you communicate your weaknesses to your team because they're already aware of them and they'll be very relieved to know that you're aware of them as well. And I think you build a great trust with the people you work with when you call out your own, whether it be inadequacies or just tendencies. It helps them feel safer in it and safer to talk to you about it. Yeah.
So good.
I mean, for me, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on it, but with what you were talking about, like wounds and all of that, I think there's some things that if they have wounded us, we say either I don't want to be like that or I don't want that in my life.
Yeah.
And so we swing the other way, and it's good to identify that, I think.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I am going to wrap it up now, but I think Rob, you can definitely reach out to him. I highly encourage it, whether it's personally or for your team. He is available, and we'll have his contact information, website in the show notes. But I think today really was, it sounds basic, but it does require a lot of work. It's not a hack. It's a process. And I say that a lot to my kids and my team. Everything is the process, right? Everything you learn, everything I learned is in process. And it's so beneficial. The gems are in the nuance. It's not this binary existence that any of us live. So I love it. Again, I've been doing this for 13 months, and every time I have the conversation, there's something else I learn. And so appreciate you coming on, man. I'm sure John does.
You're welcome.
Oh, buddy, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm serious. I want to learn more about it. I want to talk to you more about it. I need this in my leadership and just relationships in general. Like you said, like it helps me look at people. Helps me look at friends around me that maybe didn't show up in the way that I had wanted them to show up without just dismissing it. I can also say that's not necessarily who they are. And I can even either accept them for who they are or even have a conversation with them about it from that perspective that's non-judgmental.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll wrap that one up. Our first pod of the year. We're in February. That kind of tells you about our lives. But we hope to get a few more out real soon. And again, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Sean. And we'll see you soon.